Got it. Got it.
Hell yes. Are we allowed to say hell?
Yes, you can say. You can say hell, please. Please keep it PG today with our podcast. Hello, and welcome to your spiritual friends. What's up?
Your spiritual friends. We're here.
What's up? Oh, I should have. I didn't play the music. I have a whole music thing. I have a music cue that I took an album, but it's cool. I edit that in. It's cool. Fix it in post. What's up, man?
Me, I'm the man. In my head, I imagined you were just talking to someone else.
Nope. I was still getting stuff set up and kind of riffing, and then obviously I was looking at your face on YouTube and not in the Zoom, so I was really, like, man, like
a weird delay.
She's not hearing me. What's up with her right now? Damn. All right, tight. Hey, I'm David.
I'm Sarah.
And this is your spiritual friends. We did something.
It's good to be here.
It is good to be here. Yeah, man. I'm excited. It's Easter week. You know.
Have you done any Easter activities?
No.
Okay.
I bought Peeps.
That's an Easter activity. Do you like them? Like, do you eat them?
No, Sammy likes them.
Okay.
They're not for me so much.
I hate them. I think they're so gross. But I like marshmallows.
I feel like I might like Peeps for like a stage. Like, I feel like I'll eat like a sleeve of Peeps and then hate myself for like 3 years. You know what I mean? It's just like, why did I see him for like the next 3 years and I remember I hate him, and then like then enough time passes and I'm like, I'm gonna eat a sleeve of Peeps.
Yeah, you forget. You're like, maybe it's good.
Maybe it's good. Maybe I would like to try Peeps in another country, honestly.
Interesting. Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Because like we have such terrible laws regarding food. I bet it's just like regular shit. It's probably pretty delicious.
What if they're so good in like France? That would be amazing.
It'd be so hot if Peeps were lit at somewhere else, man. Oh my god. Okay. So Peeps are the extent of my Easter. What about you?
I tried to dye some Easter eggs. We got wooden eggs, and because we watched a video and they used wooden eggs, but I think they probably used like a totally different type of paint, totally different. Like, we tried to like marble them, which requires creating some type of surface tension on the water so the paint sits on top and doesn't just like become brown water when you add different things. We made a really good mess, but we did not successfly dye any eggs.
You didn't get the successful like marbling effect? You guys didn't get any?
None of the paint would even stick to the wood. It was just a complete disaster. But I feel like it was fun because I always am wanting to celebrate holidays, like carving pumpkins or dyeing Easter eggs. And I pretty much never end up doing anything. So I was glad to do that. That's life in Asheville, North Carolina. You do that. You celebrate the holidays.
What are you doing? This is the internet. People are crazy. Stop.
I mean Raleigh. Is that better?
No.
I'm not used to being famous.
Oh man, did you do Easter stuff growing up? Like, did you ever do like Easter egg hunts or any of that?
Yeah, there's a video, like a home video of me and my 2 cousins looking for Easter eggs, and my younger cousin has like a huge basket of like, he found all the eggs, and then they're like, oh, how many do you have? He's like 10 or whatever, and they're like, oh, Sarah, how many do you have? And I'm like, none, or like 1 or something. So we did some kind of Easter egg hunts. I'm Jewish, but my cousins, their dad grew up Catholic, so we've done some of the Christian holidays. Yeah, them, I feel like. So I got some fun times. When I think of Easter, I just think like I'm gonna eat a huge chocolate bunny, which I never do, but it's like that feels like so exciting.
When I think of Easter, I think of like old school, like going to church as a kid.
I was gonna say like
Like
the resurrection.
the resurrection, the real reason for the season, the
Old
other
school
season,
resurrection.
the old school resurrection swag, that a cult ceremony. Let me stop before we get in trouble. Let's back up. So that's actually kind of what we wanted to talk about tonight, and was just with Easter coming up, we were like, oh, it might be cool to talk about like our sort of experiences in the Christian church or with Christianity around that space, and kind of I don't know. I also want to talk about maybe bridging the gap between maybe a sort of spiritual sort of understanding of things and a more sort of traditionally Christian religious kind of thing as well. I think that would be fun. But yeah.
I love this because like when I think back to like my childhood experience with Christianity, it was like me as like basically a hardcore atheist, like getting in so many fights with the Christians in my school. Like
Yeah.
people that I knew, like I would just I was kind of a jerk. I would just be like, you're so dumb. Like, how can you believe that? Like, I was just like very much like in that kind of like intellectual, elitist
Really?
science. Like, no, I had no like spiritual understanding. Like, so I couldn't even relate to them on any type of spiritual
Right.
level, regardless of, like how they thought of it. I mean, I would just, I get in so many arguments. So it's so fun. Like now I'm just like, it's hilarious that I'm on this, having this conversation right now. I'm like, oh, I'm on a podcast talking about Christianity. And I was just like, what?
Yeah.
My 16-year-old self would be like, what's happening?
Where like I'm sorry, I can't even picture it. I mean, I can kind of picture it, but not really. Like that's so funny to me. Like you're such a compassionate, loving person. Like to even like in my head trying to imagine that, it seems like it must have been. I feel like it. Have you seen New Girl? You know how like Winston's like bad at pranks. He just takes things too far. He like doesn't have a real gauge on it, and he'll be like, "Oh, like I kidnapped your family. They're gonna die." Or some shit like that. Like it feels like that's what it would have been like watching you do that, because you just like it seems like a suit that wouldn't have really fit you well just naturally. You're so fucking sweet, and you're just like you're dumb, and you're like you're doing a bit much. I think.
I was very analytical as a teenager. So I was very much like, if I can't understand it with my mind, then it's not real. Now I'm the opposite. I'm like, if I can understand it with my mind, it's not real.
Yeah.
Totally switched.
The bar. That's a bar. So you right, because you're Jewish, and like so you didn't come up like necessarily like in the church at all, like in the Christian whatever church at all, which I think is always an interesting perspective, because I'm like, I had the exact opposite sort of experience of like that was my like upbringing. Like I could breathe, I was in the church, like that's what it was. And so not having that sort of outside looking in experience at all, you have zero perspective.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, oh, like more Kool-Aid. Like, what are we doing? Like, this is hot. Turn it up. Like, let's get it.
You were into it.
I was into it, man. I really liked it. I was like, I think this is it. I didn't really know anything else, but I genuinely I really enjoyed church. I liked going to church. I liked being around that kind of stuff. I don't know why. It was.
Were you connecting with it spiritually? Like, this is what I don't understand. Because when I was a kid, I was connecting with everything only on like an intellectual level. So for me, religion, if I couldn't make sense of it, intellectually, then I was just like, this is BS kind of.
I couldn't make sense of many things intellectually though as a kid.
Yeah,
truthfully,
that makes sense.
right? I had a very sort of I wasn't necessarily a highly conceptual person. I definitely leaned more in the emotional space, and that's something that transcends language, right? It's like underneath that. And I imagine that's probably a lot of what I was connecting to, which probably made the sort of cognitive dissonance that it took to kind of maybe look somewhere else a little different for me, because I could feel everybody's like intention, and I could feel like the truth underneath these words, right? The essence of it. but that wasn't what I was actually seeing being presented. And I think
Hmm.
that sort of became the bit that my psyche couldn't like make cool with. Like
That
I'd
was a
always have these
disconnect.
like, yeah, like that weird disconnect. I would always have these weird
Interesting.
conversations with my mom about that, like about the preacher and like how I'm like, nothing about what happened today matches any of what I'm getting from this book. I'm very
Hmm.
confused right now. Right. We got to really get down to it. And so, yeah. And just the way that people behaved, it just never matched. It was like Sunday was one thing, and then every other part of the week it was something else. And it just didn't really, it always really confused me. It always felt like I was like in on something, like I was just playing along with something that like, oh, we all know this is bullshit. I guess we're just doing that. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. Like I think there's a lot of great things that church does. But just those sort of big general questions. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's
We
so
don't.
interesting that you were able to get the essence when you didn't feel like it was being sort of like presented in a way that made sense to you, or like that people were living it. Um, I don't know. I'm like, how did you get the essence? Like, I feel like I just didn't get the essence of it like at all. Like, it wasn't really until I had my own sort of spiritual awakening that I was started to be like, oh, I could just like go to any church, any synagogue, any whatever, and I feel like I could connect to it regardless of how it was being presented to me. I mean, I'm sure I would have a preference, for someone, who is
Yeah, that's a.
feeling it,
I
but
I, I feel the same. I don't know. I think I just I I think nothing would surprise. I don't think it would be surprising anybody like in my life that like it's all that I'm here now that we're having this conversation would
mhm,
not be surprising to people in my life. Like
mhm,
I've always kind of been obsessed with that, but also the nature of story. I've never
mm,
been.
yeah,
I was always really fascinated by the how story was like infused in the Bible, and I think a lot of that is what transcends the dogma, right? The way these stories are constructed in a way, they're still essentially Gnostic texts. Like the whole thing is just laced with symbolism. We just got the least weird versions of it, right? And so, like the like the stories and how and not like just their interpretations of them, but I would like genuinely like go deep and be like, go deep. I would actually read them myself. I hear what you're saying and I get that, but like at some point I usually get so bored in church, I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna read this while you're talking because this is ridiculous. And just like read the stories and be like, oh, this is lit. Like, yo, this
wow,
is. And so I think the purpose of those stories though, too, is they're sort of telling the sort of perennial truth again and again and again and again and again, just with in different ways.
mm,
And the story gets it like pushes your sort of conceptual mind out of the way and drops you into this space of this character where you're on this experience. And the experience that you're having is mirroring the experience of like becoming, of spiritual unfolding. And so just being with the story, being with the words, however screwy kablooey they become, um, if you can connect to one where you're not so obsessed with like the meanings that you've been given to and genuinely just like, okay, how do I feel about this? What comes up for me when I read this? It a lot of the time it can get behind a lot of the silliness that you experience, I think.
wow, that yeah, that's fascinating to me. Because yeah, I feel like in time we've had conversations about story before with like hero movies or Marvel movies or whatever, those kind of action movies. I feel like I don't really like, it's hard for me to connect to them. So I feel like I
Mm.
always think of, I'm always like, I don't know, like I don't know what the purpose of story is like in my life. But then I was kind of thinking like, oh well, relationship stories, like more like indie movies and stuff like that. I feel like I can like immerse myself and feel what's coming. Like I feel like I do learn about myself
Mhm.
from those things, but I really never thought of using Bible stories as going on a journey like that and like immersing yourself in the story of that. I feel like the Bible is like not that easy to read. So I'm also like, it's so curious that you like as a child were just able to connect to it so readily.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You said that. That's so fun. That's always been my sort of experience of story.
Yeah.
Because I think, yeah, I was really interested in that aspect, but I feel like story gets your conceptual mind out of the way in such a great way that like it pushes your ego kind of aside. You're not thinking about your egoic state of being when you're involved, when you're truthfully like immersed in a story.
Hmm.
And so from start to finish, you're out of the way. You're really just being this character and these characters in real time.
Yeah.
And the sort of, I feel like the sort of transcendent space of which all stories kind of come from,
Hmm.
the more sort of clean that transmission, the more aligned and more intuitively resonant stories can become to people. And so the ones that are in the Bible, I think the reason they've stuck around even for as long as they have is like there is something there that people are just like, they don't even know what it is. They don't have to understand it. And so I think that there's a reason why there's like they've used the Christ story. I mean, we of what we know of use it like 16 times. It's
Right.
compelling and it gets the point across of like where we're pointing to. There's a reason that everybody's got a flood story. There's a reason that people have everybody has similar creation stories. Like these perennial archetypes resonate on such a deep level that like I think it was your friend who told me that. She had this quote about how certain the right, essentially it's, I'm butchering it, but like she's essentially saying the right sort of teaching is going to find you when you're ready for it.
Mhm.
Like the exoteric aspects of it, if you're just like a kid and you're like, oh man, snakes are weird, that's weird, like cool, but like there's being dropped in there. And then the kind of more your awareness expands, the more your understanding of that story is going to expand. And
Yeah.
so you'll go from like, you know, kiddie to exoteric to maybe Bible college to atheist, agnostic, whatever. And then like, you know, maybe you come back a mystic and it's a completely different experience for you. Amen.
Yeah. Yeah, this is actually, I feel like you're like, my brain is like exploding right now. So we're talking about this because it's just making me think of so many things. For example, like one of the things I was thinking about is my intellectualism and analysis brain, I think prevented me from connecting with the story, right? Because like I'm going, well, is it realistic that two of every animal is getting on the ship? You know what I mean? Which I think is like
Mm-hmm.
what a lot of people do who are atheists or who like lean that way, is they like look at the facts of the story and they're trying
Yeah.
to take it as like a historical document of like, did this happen in this way? And if not,
Yeah.
then it's a useless piece of writing or whatever, you know, it's a useless story. It's a use like there and I think now as I've like, you know, had my spiritual awakening and I'm kind of connecting with things on a more maybe like mystical level, or maybe it is like maybe a more story level, or I'm like more connected with like the experience of being human rather than like the facts of like external world or something, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like that's when you can really go like, okay, what is this sharing with me, and like what about this feels relevant to my life, or what about this feels like it's teaching me something, or that it's
Mm-hmm.
holding some truth, or trying to tell me something about some truth, um rather than just the fact. It's like a totally different way of engaging.
That's so funny that you use that because I think that's really one of the, I think that's really the real sort of tragedy of having to, when we only sort of explore the Bible from sort of a literal perspective.
Mhm.
I mean, it makes it hard for anybody to get on board.
Yeah,
I
it's like
mean,
makes no sense, but it's so,
doesn't.
as we're talking about it, I'm like, why would we think that that was the way to engage with it? Like
Yeah.
there are so we like we as an intellectual and like science-based like culture also read books, like we also read
Mhm.
fiction, we also engage with movies. Like why would we assume that the Bible was actually like like a history textbook. Like
Yeah.
it's so interesting. Like I don't even know where that.
The way that, I mean, there's so many, I mean, sure, we can get into all of that, like not the why, but maybe the
Yeah.
why. I don't even think it's necessary, but the why is always like, I mean, there's so much there that it's just, I feel like we forget just how sort of young from like a consciousness perspective we are as Western society is, as like this sort of, you know, colonizing, you know, British Empire kind of Western society idea is still relatively sort of young from a consciousness perspective. And so a lot of the folks, a lot of us, I mean, the availability to even question any of this has probably not been available for the masses for what, like
Yeah,
what?
that's true.
There's a
Been
very
like 10
short
years.
amount of time, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For people to even have space to even do that. And so, and then every other time that there was sort of a revolution of it happening, people going, wait a second, there's been, you know, war. It was like World War, right before World War One. It was like everything, people were really popping. They were like, hold up, wait, you know what I'm saying? It's just, there's always some kind of shenanigans that shows up, probably because it feels like, for me, that's a time of intense polarity, right? You're usually like you can't really hold on to the sort of cognitive dissonance that's showing up. It's either you're oscillating from side to side, and at some point there's a pop. And unfortunately, like, a lot of the time that shows up as us acting out in like kind of violent ways culturally. But like, it's really interesting. I think the timing of it really places us in a really unique place in history to be able to kind of not only get the information, but get it out to everybody. Like, we're having this conversation on YouTube.
Right.
That's fucking weird, right? I can post this and, you know, somebody can see it, whatever. And I'm not saying this is like, you know, this is the lit shit of all time, but I'm saying, like, you know, I can get the lit shit of all time online and actually sit there and be with it and practice it and bring that into my life. Whereas, like, even when we were kids, like, we remember the dumb shit we believed just because somebody said it and you just couldn't check. Like, well, what, I'm gonna check the, I couldn't check the image. He was just like, you bought that shit. Like, oh yeah, like gum, stomach, 7 years. Definitely.
Is that not true?
Definitely. Exactly. Right.
Oh shoot.
I just think that's so interesting. Fuck.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, thinking about people not being able to read the Bible, you know, just because it wasn't translated into a language that they could understand or read, and just having to take someone's word for it and someone's interpretation of it. And I mean, that's what's kind of interesting about the Jewish tradition is there's like the Torah, which is like the Old Testament, but then there's the Talmud, which is, and I'm like talking about as if I'm like, I just realized the confidence with which I was speaking, and I was like, I'm not an expert in this. But then the Talmud is the text where like rabbis throughout time have debated and like spoken about their interpretation of the Torah. And you kind of like have to read both, which is kind of cool. There's like, it's like a living, I don't know if it's living, but I don't know if like people are adding to it, but like talk, you know, this kind of like living document that's the discussion of like, okay, what does it actually mean?
I love that. Fuck yeah.
Which
More
is
of that,
cool.
please. I think a lot of that's been sequestered for Christianity into like the intellectual spaces and intellectual circles. Because I think I read something the other day. It was a quote from like very close to when the Bible was first being popped out and stuff. And it was literally like, for anybody, and this is I can't remember what or where it was, but it was essentially like it was this guy pretty much shitting on anybody who would ever think to have a literal interpretation of the Bible. And like, just like, how would anybody do that? And it was very old. It was like, it was closer to 2,000 years ago. And I just thought that was so mind blowing to me, because I definitely think a lot of stuff has gotten lost in translation. And I think the one of the biggest challenges that you run into is when there is so much dope shit that has been able to come from that for a lot of people. When people are actually experiencing change in things that is tangible in their lives and they're attributing it to that, that's tighter than any sort of book or any preacher or anything that can say. And so I think that a lot of the time when you fear sort of letting go of this thing that it's like, unfortunately for a lot of people, treat like a little genie that's going to like make them happy and safe and stuff. It's really challenging. I can see the reluctance to maybe question it. You know what I mean?
I really like the idea of Jesus as a genie, like in a lamp. When he said that, I was like, yes, I like that.
Oh, bro, stop. Yeah, that's so funny. Oh my God. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, like it's kind of I don't know. I don't know. It's so interesting because it really it can take on like any role in someone's life, right? Based on their own point of view, like based on their own just like perspective, how they experience the world. Kind of like we're saying, like for you were able to connect to those stories right away, and that kind of did something for you in like this tangible way. For me, it was like I was only connecting with it intellectually and like literally, and then once I had that kind of perspective shift, I was able to like get that essence underneath that I wasn't able to tap into ahead of time. For others, it's like a moral code book or whatever, where it's like telling, which could be the same as any type of social rules, which I think are maybe some of the hardest things to let go of. Like if that's how you're engaging with the Bible, that's going to be deep there, I think, because that's right. I noticed for myself, like with the rules of engagement and like social things where you're like, well, this is like what people in society do and should do. Like some of those things are like the hardest things to let go of. Luckily for me, I think the Bible or some interpretations of the Bible influence that, because I think as a Jewish person I grew up in Orange County, California, which is like very Christian. Like there's tons of Christians there. So I feel like I was going to say, I think it's sort of in the water everywhere. I don't know if that's totally true. I think I definitely grew up in like a specifically kind of Christian area, but it's like it definitely is in the culture. You can't really avoid it, even if you're not going to church or not engaging with it directly. And it's in our, even I was just like thinking like the Pledge of Allegiance, like one nation under God, like it just like little sneaks in there a little bit. Like no matter what, if you live in America, there's not really like a separation there between
no
the nationality and the religion. More than some places, but still there.
It's still kind of floating underneath kind of a lot of what everybody kind of just nature of like the holidays and things. It's like
totally.
How do you get and a lot of the time this sort of misunderstanding aspect of it is the bits that are sort of circulated culturally. Like it's so interesting to watch folks be like, this is so Christianity is dumb because of this thing, and be like, right, like what do you think that this means? Like to be, and you're not anti like God from a sort of mystical sense, you're sort of anti the Judeo-Christian, Christian version of God, right? Whatever like is the sort of cultural shenanigans of that you've kind of been like, this is bullshit. Well, like and I think that's always been, that was one of the funniest things that I think I ever like noticed when I was like, oh, you're not even what do you think they're talking about?
Totally. But in a way it's like you can't even understand, like you can really only understand things like as you're able to like you're like as your conceptual mind and like as your openness, like I don't know, because we can have those kind of openings where we're like all of a sudden, oh, like I have more understanding of that, or I have more openness to experience kind of that underlying thing, but there's not really a way to like teach that. Like it sort of has to be invoked somehow, but it can't really
Yeah.
be done to you. Like it
No.
feels really complicated. So it's kind of like, no, like for you to read the Bible and you're understanding the essence, that's because you had that openness or you had that kind of like availability to understand that. Whereas like the kid next to you could read it and just be like, I love boats, like, or whatever. I
Yeah.
don't know. And
Yeah.
animals,
Sort
you
of
know,
completely sort of
which
checked
is
out.
what you're,
Absolutely.
yeah, like what you thought. I feel like you said that earlier of like, you understand it from your,
Wherever
whatever makes sense to you at the time or whatever you can like lock into at the time.
Mhm. Yeah, somebody in the TikTok
Mm.
chat asked atheist or theist question mark. I think they're asking me. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on those labels? How you feel about that, Sarah? Where you at on that?
What is the like? What is he at? Like,
It
what's the
literally
question
just
there?
says atheist or theist question mark in the TikTok chat right
Well,
now.
atheist is like without the religion, right? Or without God, and theist
Yeah,
is
that
with
whole
it.
yeah.
I don't know. It's so interesting. Like the way that I relate to atheism is interesting because sometimes I forget that people are like still atheists just because I kind of like moved on from that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
sometimes I just start talking to people like about God or something, and I'm just like, I cannot just go into conversations like assuming that we're on the same page about
Nope,
this.
nope, nope. That
Um,
word contains a lot of meaning, different meanings for a lot of different people. Holy shit, yeah, big time.
but yeah, it's like, I don't know, because like when I was atheist, it was like from this very intellectual perspective
Mm-hmm.
of being like, well, I don't know that there's a God. I mean, I was more agnostic, but I was like really trying to be atheist, but I was just kind of like, you can, but literally, I was like, you can't prove that something doesn't exist. So I have to kind of be agnostic.
Yeah.
But I was like, I was almost like yearning for atheism. But now I'm like, it sort of doesn't, it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense from an intellectual. Yeah. If you're like, okay, I don't think there's like a guy in the sky with like a beard or whatever. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, sure. Like, yeah, be atheist. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. It's so, I don't know. I don't know how people, it's such a personal experience of like how you're relating with the universe. It's like hard to, I think that's why it's
Mm-hmm.
like hard to find
Because you
words
could
that have common meaning.
like because you could be on both sides of those and be relating to the
Yeah,
universe in the exact same way, right? You could be both of those and be
totally.
like saying the same fucking thing, but just
Totally.
using different words, which is just like I love my favorite. One of my favorite side guru quotes is like, these words are a social contract that we have.
Hmm.
Like my boy Jake was just like, they're containers for meaning. And the meaning that you add to that is the thing that really kind of decides where we are kind of internally, and saying that it's such a personal experience is really like eye-opening. It really makes me think of like I get curious, or rather this idea that I say I think people, it'd be really useful if we became curious what these terms are kind of pointing towards, like getting more precise about what like we mean when people are saying God, right? What are
Hmm.
we doing? And I think the sort of the lacking of the ability to sort of articulate those aspects of things really makes things challenging, because it's like, oh, like, what do I mean when I say God? It's like,
Totally.
me? Right? How long do you have? Like, it might
Yeah.
be here for a minute, right? Like it's a lot, but it's not. And so I think that really is always the inquiry that I'm curious about when I'm talking to somebody about that. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah. What do you mean? Yeah. Yeah. And I think that as a society, we're really bad at that in general. Like I think that comes up
Yeah.
in politics all the time. All of these like phrases that are thrown about, and hashtag, like, I mean, hashtags are the worst like for
Yeah.
that. It's like everyone, you're just saying a phrase or you're saying words, and they could have totally different meaning. Like, and I think a lot of people get in fights about these things because they literally don't understand what the phrase means to someone else or the word means to someone else.
Yeah.
And it's like purely semantics, which is like so frustrating because it's just like, do we need the conflict? Like, it's so extra. But yeah, I think that is like in a way rooted maybe in religious confusion, like religious text confusion of like not really inquiring, like, what does this really mean? I mean, I always just come back to the Adam and Eve story and like how much misunderstanding there is about that. Like the entire moral of the story is taken out of context or whatever. And even just the word sin or the word, it's like it's so assumed, there's so many assumptions made about it, and it's a word that's used so often and like so much and applied to so many things, and we have no idea like what that even means.
I find I think that may have been the straw that broke the camel's back for me, is that really kind of made me go like, at least for a bit, right, was the phrases that didn't mean anything, the jargon that I like, the church
jargon,
like,
perfect word, yeah,
that you like this, you repeat this phrase,
right?
What does it mean? If you actually take any kind of inquiry, the answers that I would get would be these empty ideas of that didn't actually mean anything, that could just be whatever this person decided it meant today. And I'm like, you're not, this is weird, right? This is weird. We're just saying the same thing, like we're repeating these phrases. And so like, yeah, pattern recognition is something, a little neurodivergent. I'm like, hold up, everybody's saying the exact same phrase.
Yeah.
And they ask you a question about something that's happening in their life today, right now. And you just said a phrase, like a jargon phrase that doesn't actually mean, and like maybe it brings people comfort at some spaces. I'm not saying there isn't an inherent usefulness in it, but the emptiness that I kind of started perceiving in sort of these kind of stuff that people would flippantly just kind of toss about, I just was like, all right. It just made me look a little deeper, like,
yeah,
whoa. And it's so weird because like Sam, just give my information on it. Yeah, because Sam will be like, Sam talks about her experience with it and being sort of from the outside looking in too. And she's like, it was always very sort of strange to her, which I think is a super interesting take too. Because I'm like, wow, that's just, what must that have looked like to you?
Yeah, it looks like a bunch of crazy people in a cult. That's what it looks like. Like, you know what I mean? I mean, because people do, they just and that's what it would be. It would be so frustrating in high school when I was like talking to people, they'll just be like, you're going to hell. First of all, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like Jesus loves you. Jesus died for your sins. There's just like all of these things that are repeated, and you're just like, but like, what are you talking about? Like,
and I feel like when you
what are you actually talking about?
I would frustrate all my freaking Bible teachers to shreds, because I would legit would just be like, okay, but like, let's look at this story. Let's look at what's implied here, what you are implying right here, right now, and be like, this thing is like here and here. And I think that's something that like, when people from like atheists or whatever would like look at it, they'd be like, well, this and here and here and here, this is what you've implied, that this person, this thing decides who gets what. And that's where all those sort of crazy discussions and stuff happens. Cause it's like, when you break it down and you go piece by piece, you're like, these dots that duck don't like, what is this?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, where you're just like, I'm not following. I mean, and there's also the element of people using the stories for power. So it's like you can read anything you want sort of into a story and take meaning from it, which is maybe what happened with Adam and Eve. I don't really know, but this kind of you just read into it and you're like, well, this serves my purposes as the person in power and with the money who's like looking, to create some situation.
Yo, you literally just described damn it, I don't want to bring it up. It's past. It's past, so I feel like we can talk about it again. And it's only been probably like 2 weeks. But like, you really just reminded me of my experience with that whole fucking Will Smith thing, and how everybody like grabbed it and was like, my corner, my story, my thing, and this is what it means. This is what it means for everybody. And somebody else would be like, well, actually, my story, and this is what it means, and this is what it means for everybody. And just people are just, and I'm just like, nobody's it, like, it's just like, how could Christians ever and I'm like, are we not? It's like, are we, sorry, this is the same, dude. Like, it's all like, this is, that's whenever anybody's like wants to shit on like people in the Christian church stuff, and you know, fair enough, I'm never gonna whatever, but like I have so much compassion for the sort of nature of that misunderstanding, because it's not just to Christians, it's fundamental in the way that we sort of experience our reality right now in general. Like,
I think this kind of comes back to, so story. I mean, we were talking, you know, before the podcast, what should we talk about? And we were talking about story, and this is actually not the direction necessarily that I had in mind, but it makes so much sense. And I feel like it's helping me understand also how I have been relating to story, which is like more on a personal level of like, what are the stories that I tell myself about my life? Like what is, I mean, I think most people, I probably have it in a way less to a lesser extent than a lot of people. Like I hear people like tell the story of their lives, like, but I feel like everyone has, maybe I don't have it to a less, like that maybe one story where it's like some type of thread where they're like, this happened when I was a kid, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And it's like, that's the story that they tell that kind of like defines their entire life. And maybe it's themed, like mine is themed relationships. I feel like I don't have a ton of like story that I often repeat about other things, but I have like this like definite like single thread story that I have been telling and building on. It's like I've been writing it my whole life. Where when I was in 5th grade, I wrote this much of it, and then, you know, I was in middle school and I added to it, and then in high school I added to it, and it's like now I'm in my 30s and I have this, you know, long thread of like, well, this is my relationship story,
right? But like, how fragile is that shit though?
Yeah, and being I mean, it's and that being super identified with it, and that's what I hear when other people tell their stories too. It's like people are so identified with their stories, but then you kind of start to find cracks. But I kind of I feel like I'm going to take it in another direction, but I want to bring it back to like, we have our personal stories, that's like how we perceive the world, and then we also, I think, interpret the stories that we hear, so movies that we're seeing, Bible stories, whatever it is, and we're through our own filtered story are then filtering those stories and all of the jargon that we're hearing everywhere. The Will Smith, Chris Rock situation, we're seeing that through our story that we tell about whatever. Like and that's just playing out. Like everyone is just has their own story, and they're just telling literally everything that happens around them, their story, their version of that story.
Yes. Oh no, I've literally been, that's so you made me think of two things. And it's just like, first, I think the function of the sort of meta narratives of the Bible is one that is a story interrupt, right? They're written in a way that it's really, I mean, we did it over whatever, how many years, but it's written in a way that even if you're jerking around with it a bunch and trying to add your meaning, there's still like something that sneaks through. There's still something there that kind of like, you're like, maybe, like, I don't think anybody who like has that experience, I think a lot of times will be like, and I think that is a deep connection to like that space of like, there might be something here. It's not this, but like, it's this sort of internal sense. And I think those stories are written in a way, it reminds me of like those movies like from the 80s that like I could never watch like into like my like teen years. I couldn't, because they like disturb my subconscious, but like I could all those Jim Henson things that he did, which were just occult masterpieces, literally like the Never Ending Story, any of those, like that stuff that would kind of reach into my subconscious and grab it by the throat, it would really deeply affect me in a different way than like Christianity did. And so I always am curious about the nature of how we've decided to put words together over time archetypally to tell stories that kind of push through your own sort of bullshit story. But the story thing is very much sort of the nature of, it reminds me of our ego, right? Or the identity that we've sort of constructed for ourselves, that we're constantly filtering everything through. And like, you're absolutely, I think I totally agree that our perceptions are by and large just colored by this sort of psychological identity, like you said, that we're constantly adding to and then taking from. And it can be like, it's rough, because in the beginning sort of your sort of awakening into sort of self-awareness, your realization, a lot of the time what you're doing is dissecting that story, and that's fucking really important and useful and great, right, for people to do, to go, wait a second. And what we don't really kind of think about though is that we are sort of working on the thing that we are identifying with, right? You're working on a story that you wrote. And so a lot of the time we spend that first little period, we're like trying to rewrite the story. That's positive thinking.
Totally.
That's, you know, that space of trying to like, okay, erase this, maybe go back and like look at this, and this is this, super useful, super important. But like, then there's a fucking U-turn switch like down the line where it's like, wait a second, I'm really trying to hold on to this story. Why am I holding on so tightly? Like, oh, this is my diagnosis. This is my, I am this thing that happened in the past. I am this thought. I am this, that. And you're like, it's no longer like freeing. Now it's kind of, the construct is working against you. And you're like, whoa, how dare you tell me that my diagnosis doesn't make me who I am? This is my story. Fuck you. Like, that's literally what you constantly see is like, how dare you infringe upon my identity and my story? Shut the fuck up. How dare you? You're a bad person. And people can't, and we can't. And it's so interesting watching us be there culturally, because it's like, people go like, oh, things are as bad as they've gotten. It's just like, no, it's always darkest before the dawn. I think that's a real experience of people. We're reaching a sort of critical mass with the stories that we're telling ourselves, and they are no longer like working for a lot of us. And a lot of people are having to go, wait a second, I'm not this fucking story.
Yeah.
Like, that's the nature of mystery and spiritual inquiry, is like, wait, if I'm not this story, what the fuck am I? And now we're cooking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, I think for so many people, and for myself, a lot of times it's hard to even see your story, because you're just living it and you just think that it's reality. Like, if you think that something's reality, you don't think of it as a story. So it's like, I think it's oftentimes hard to even get enough space to see, oh, this is the story that I've been telling, because we're just telling it, like we're living it. We're the character in the story, like. And I feel like when you were talking about the Bible and kind of, or even movie, any story that you can get immersed into that's not your own story, I guess, like kind of what you were saying is like, has the potential to bring you out of your own story, because now you're able to be in another story. And if you're able to be in another story, then how real is your own? It's just it's just your own mind either telling your story or engaging in this other story. So it's like, oh, if you can just go from story to story, then how rock solid is your own like identity? I am Sarah, and these are all my experiences. Like that can be,
throwing one like new thing. You throw in one new thing to that story, and it's completely different. Now you have a completely different story, right? Yeah, that's flimsy. That's like
it kind of offers that breakdown. If it's like, oh, you can just pretend to be this other character, then which one is real? And neither of them are real. Like, it can draw attention to that, which I think puts a crack in it. For me, like I was telling the story that I was like, oh, guys like don't like me. That's like always been my story. Like they don't want to be my friend. They don't want to be my like lover. They don't want to whatever. Like they don't want to be in a relationship with me. And then like it was interesting because I was having a conversation with someone and I was like literally telling that story. Like we're like kind of talking about that experience. And then I would like have these like little things pop up and I would be like, you know, for example, I'd be like, well, David's my friend. Like there's like that little crack. But then I was so attached to my story that I'm like, but that's different for some reason. Like I don't, or that's an anomaly or like whatever. We like make excuses for something that doesn't fit into our story. That's just something else, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then you start kind of having to acknowledge like that it can't be something else. Like it's a crack in my story and my story cannot be true. Like that story cannot be true if there's these other like if there's these other experiences. And it like kind of for like eventually I kind of saw like, okay, yes, I have all my evidence. I have all of my examples for why my story is true. It's this and this and this. Those things, it's not that those things aren't true. Like, whatever. If you have some traumatic experience or you were bullied or you have, you know, whatever, like diagnosed, it's not that those things are not true. It's just that they're not they're not everything. They're like a really small piece of like a bigger thing. And that's just what you're focusing on. Like, that's what I kind of started to realize is like, it almost is like a big painting, like a big colorful painting. And I'm going, this is a yellow painting or whatever. And I'm like only focusing on the yellow part of the painting. And I'm like telling the story of the yellow. And it's like, and then I'm going, oh, but there is red. But I'm like, no, it's yellow. You know, I'm just ignoring it. It's yellow. And then, but then you start having to kind of acknowledge, well, you can't just say the red is not there or that it's not, you know, whatever.
Well, it becomes paradoxical, right?
Yeah.
The more you get there, and there's a phrase that I think I was introduced first to by Tara Brach, the writer of Radical Acceptance, and she did a lecture, and in the phrase was called "real but not true," which I thought was like a perfect way of encapsulating that paradox in the sense of the story is real to an extent. And, you know, as long as that's the game that you're playing, it's real. It's very fucking real. But is it the whole truth of the situation? Right. It's like, I think really what we're kind of pointing towards is an actual lived direct experience of reality where I know I can choose what stories I'm engaging in but I'm not run by it, right? I'm actually just living. I can acknowledge the ego that shows up, but it's not running the show. But I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said so much of the challenge there is being given sufficient space to like go, oh, I'm really bought into my story. And I think it's even more challenging for
there's that little, do I share this? What should I say? What do I think about this?
Challenging for it's challenging for everybody for different reasons. Let me just not generalize. I think it can be really challenging, specifically when quote good things have come from the story, right? It feels like the story's sort of working for you, which is why I think suffering is kind of sometimes integral to a lot of our journeys, because we're like, that something here must be bullshit. Like I must be doing something wrong. You know what I mean? Like you really start questioning the validity of that thing a lot quicker when things aren't really going.
But the positive, but yeah, it's like you have to be willing to question the positive thing too. Like, am I so smart or whatever? Like the thing is, like if you're and I think that is a lot of times people do have that positive story and then something happens to like undermine it, or something happens where they lose their footing, and that's when they really like have that awakening. I had a friend who was like, there should be, you know, a spiritual growth or like personal development workshop that's only focused on the positive. Like, so you go in with your positive stories and you have to work with those instead of going in with your suffering and working on the suffering. And I was like, that's a great idea. Like, I wonder if that would be more or less painful. I'm not sure.
Yo, that is hot. Yo, yes. Oh, I love that. I love that as a fucking, yeah, let's look at that. Get rid of the fucking positive thinking.
Yeah,
That
like
shit is
what are the things that you think are so great? Like someone who's just like, well, I'm just like so beautiful, or I'm so smart, or I'm funny, or I'm a great family member, or like whatever those things are that we hold
yeah.
that are also part of our identity and part of our story. Yeah, but we don't want to question those things. And that's why I think the rewriting of the story doesn't work, because we're just creating new story. Like ultimately we're not trying to get to a better story, we're trying to eliminate the story altogether so we can be present and not just be reactive.
I don't know if it doesn't work, but it just works until it doesn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
that's true.
it works till it don't. Like I had a call this week or last week with someone. They were talking about that sort of idea of sort of this resonates really big for me every time I say it, but it's just that idea of like constantly emerging as the new me. Ooh, this is the new me. Ooh,
You're a butterfly every morning. A new butterfly.
Like, right, like I'm shedding that version, and it's like it's the new version.
Yeah.
And that's dope until it's not, until you realize that the thing that's emerging is just your ego giving you a bit more leeway, because the egoic identity will grasp onto anything. And what I mean by that, I feel like I'm not being specific, is that sort of self-obsessed thing inside of you that's constantly analyzing and trying to figure out everything about your life. I think that when we don't bring attention to that, like you said, that's really the sort of function of that thing. It's just grasping at identity. Like, this is who I am. I'm not that. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. I think I agree with this. I don't agree with this. I believe in this. I don't believe in this. I should be this. I shouldn't be this. And that's all it's doing. And it's like, it doesn't have any other fucking function except that. It can't do anything but that. And like, literally, that's the story. Like, that's the whole fucking function of the story, is like, does this support my story? Does it not support who I think I am? Identity, identity, identity. And so when you see that like nonstop sort of hum that's in your fucking head, you're just like, wait, like, I can just notice that. And I think in the beginning, right, we very much want to have an intercourse with this thing. We want to like work it out, figure it out. Why did I do this? Why did my mom and cousins and I hate Sprite.
Yeah.
Like, what, you know what I mean? But then at some point, you see how neurotic you've become, constantly checking in to like experience the world through that story. You're not actually seeing people. You're seeing your idea of who those people are. You're not actually listening. Or like, it's just, that's like, for me, feeling the nature of that story sort of dissolve in front of you and just seeing it as like, oh, that's a thing that's just happening. This thing that I don't get is me. Like this whatever is like seeing that space, that's kind of more truthfully me. But the sexy thing is that the egoic space does, it will literally hijack that. It will go, okay, now you're the awareness. I'll do that for you. I got you, dog.
Yeah.
Now we're the awareness.
I'm
the wholeness. I am oneness. I am the universe. Like, we do that shit, right? And then like the ego's like just sitting there like, oh yeah, right.
I want like a shirt that says that. Now we're the awareness.
I'm one with the universe now. It's like, and then that's when people get caught up, because it's just like that. Totally. I don't agree with that. I agree with that. And then just that belief shit gets janky really quickly.
We cannot help but to attach ourselves to things and to conceptualize. And what?
It's a reflex.
Yeah, it's a reflex. Yeah, I mean, I guess, do we like get better with practice? I don't know. I feel like, yeah, it's really interesting with like the story thing. I've been thinking about how like the outside world like reflects. So like with my story thing, I'm like, okay, well, I have like this example, but then I had to start thinking, yeah, but I also have like this other example, that these other examples that don't fit, that I'm not telling that story, that I never talk about, right? Like, oh yeah, they're in there in my memory, but I'm not repeating that over and over again. Like, that's not what I'm telling my friends about. That's just not the story I'm telling. It's still there. I'm just ignoring it, basically. And that's really interesting. But I'm like, no, as we're like talking about this, I'm using this as therapy. I'm like noticing that like it's still very external, right? And part of what's helped me break down the story is being like, oh, I'm having this experience with someone, and that's going against my story. That's breaking that expectation of like what my story is, which I think is helpful. But ultimately, it's like I'm still in this like story thing. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Like, can we ever engage? Like, how do can we engage in our lives without constantly having that mirror there of like taking what's being shown to us externally and like creating meaning out of it, I guess. You know?
Obviously, I mean, I think obviously I'm always a yes and no kind of dude, but it really reminded me of that. Really, I feel like what we're referring to is sort of the direct experience of reality as like a enlightened person, right? Like that's sort of what we're pointing to. And you can look at this thing in sort of stages, but there is the sort of moment of awakening, which I think is a crucial and important one. But then there's also these sort of other moments of sort of maybe even recognizing the ego, the self-critical whatever, and then eventually sort of that falling away, and then you sort of kind of identify with this deeper, higher, whatever self thing, and then being kind of one with that, and then at some point that falls away, and then that's when you've kind of been dropped into sort of a more direct experience. Now, the sort of challenge that we run into when we're talking about that is, truthfully, you can't, it's beyond conceptualization. So the egoic mind that's constantly saying, this means this doesn't mean this. I agree with that. I don't agree with that. Can't conceptualize a state of being that transcends conceptualization, right? Your life doesn't stop being your life, right? Like you just start, you experience life differently, but it's not something that we can sort of mentally think about, because it's more of a, like, the question that people ask about that space all the time is like, how do I make decisions? And the way decisions are made in that space don't necessarily add up to the sort of logical space in your brain. And so the sort of reluctance to that, to die, actually, right, to die on your cross, to allow the ego to die and actually experience the kingdom of heaven, is to say, you know what, I don't need the story. Like, that's cool. It'll be there probably, I don't know, but like, to really jump, that's the leap of faith that I think we all sort of end up taking as we sort of progress spiritually and mature spiritually, is that sort of leap of faith to be able to recognize that, oh, the egoic story that I told myself my whole life, I can leave that. And I think initially there's a tendency to want to, well, because we were so used to working with the story and like playing with it, there's a tendency to want to like only sort of focus on when the story is happening. But like you said, like there's a powerfully transformational usefulness in the sort of practice, like spiritual practice, being with someone and just listening to them, being outside and being silent, being by yourself and spending time sort of bathing in the silence of you, the part of you, being with the part of you, the deepest part of you that isn't connected to that story, that isn't being run by that story, that's observing that story. And it feels like the more time you spend with that, I mean, it starts washing over you in all kinds of other ways. It's like you're being baptized by your own self, and you're waking up to, oh, you know what? I can just go to the grocery store. I know I have a story about like social, whatever the fuck, but like, what if instead of trying to say, does this match up to my story, I just notice that story and go, that's a story, and keep going, right? And just start working from that space. But I think a lot of the time in the beginning, it's important for folks to sort of loosen that by dismantling those stories and playing with them and moving things around and turning into like the new me and the new me.
Totally.
Right.
I was just thinking, like, as you were talking about that, I was like, wow, in my whole like unfolding of the story process, like I feel like I'm in a way like actually really enjoying being sort of identified with the person who is unraveling this story. Like there's something like enjoyable about like now I'm sort of like like I'm not as identified with like the story, but I'm like identified with the story about how I'm like coming out of the story. You know what I mean? And I'm like kind of, and in a way I'm like, oh, that's kind of a good place to be. Like I'm to acknowledge like, oh, I'm enjoying being in this space too. Of like, I know that this isn't, you know, like the ultimate truth or whatever. Like this isn't where I'm going to be forever, but this is like a fun place in a way for like my mind and my experience. And I feel like I'm learning a lot and I'm like having this new experience and like that's really fun. I could at any moment like go to that kingdom of heaven thing where I'm like, none of this fucking matters. Like everything, I can just dissolve it right now. I don't have to even like ever think about it again, really. But I think there's also an element too of acknowledging like that ego and that story. I think it does change over time and like it can dissolve to varying degrees, but there's always gonna be like our mind is always going to conceptualize like we're always going to be in story. Like I don't think we'll ever be free of that, but it's just how sort of like quickly can we recognize that we're in it or whatever, like how, right, it's like that level of identification, like how identified are we in any given moment, and can we spend more and more time outside of the identification even if the thoughts are happening and even if we're telling these stories. Or
you hit on something that I think is, you really kind of made me think about the sort of Fibonacci sequence for a second there. And
wow.
Like, well, just, I think that's a few things. I feel like, first of all, like that idea that we're never going to be sort of free of conceptualization. I don't think I'm not pointing towards a freedom from conceptualization. I'm really literally pointing to like a state of no self. That's like an actual live state that people can actually live in. This shit is documented. It's not,
but like all the time.
I mean, like these states are permanent. Like you can, that's a point. And here's the thing, permanent meaning in the sense of sort of the Fibonacci sequence, in the sense that, yeah, the line has gotten closer to the middle point, but it's indistinguishable. It's like 0.000 point, whatever. We're like, it's just like, you can't, it's not, there are no longer these sort of big swings and disconnects and dropping in the story and buying on your thing.
Yeah.
It's just gotten so close that it's indistinguishable, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not like, and so yes and no, right? But it wouldn't look to us, it looks like a straight line for all intents and purposes, from like a relative sense. It's like, yeah, but of course it can never actually touch the line. That's just the nature of having a body and being in reality, right?
Having a mind.
But I also think that like that sort of sentiment of being like, oh, you know, well, even trying to do something or hit something, but I think there's also this kind of, let me back up, because there's actually something you made me think about, which was the nostalgia of letting go of your story, of letting go of the sense, because a lot of what we're pointing towards is letting go of the sense of accomplishment that comes with mastering your story, with being the hero of your story. Like when you are not engaging with it, you have to also drop the pride of accomplishment. That's the nature of humility. Like that leap of faith is into like, fuck, whoa, like the way, and it's not to say that that story in some degree or another doesn't exist, but my relationship to it is no longer that it has controlled who I am. Like this is the thing. I can't carry that sense of accomplishment necessarily, because what was there to accomplish? I just dropped the story. Just stopped. I like stopped interacting with this space. Right. And it's like, you didn't do anything. You just stopped doing so fucking much.
Right.
And like, there's that's not sexy. Like people don't want that. It feels good to like the people, that's sort of a weird trap that I think we've all fallen into, is that space of like constant healing, constant epiphany, constant catharsis. Cause feels good to be a new person. Look at me, I fucking did it again. Oh no, I suck again. Oh no, wait. Oh, look at the new me now. It's like fucking go. It feels good. It's like there's no greater hit of like cheap dopamine than turn it into like the new version of yourself every fucking 2 days. Like, are you kidding me?
Yes. It's
hard to let go. you're not the doer anymore. You're also
Mm-hmm.
no longer sort of running the story the way that you think that you want to. Like there's a
Mm-hmm.
there's a measure of control that has to be relinquished to something that has nothing to do with who you think you are. That's
Mm-hmm.
rough for people. That's fucking like that always was an indicator to me of something faith wise that made sense to me, because the faith that I was taught kind of growing up in the Christian church never felt like it cost me anything. I was like, how hard is it to say that I believed in a person that like felt, I mean, the story's kind of wonky, but sure, I just have to say it. Cool. Well, you know, you got to like follow these rules. Well, these rules don't make a lot of sense, and most of you aren't following the rules. So what are we doing here? Like that
Right.
never felt like it cost me anything, but letting go of who I think that I am and all the stories and the love, the judgment and all the crap and stuff attached to that, and jumping into something that I can't actually conceptualize, that feels like faith to me. I'm like, fuck, okay, that's life.
Mm-hmm.
Got way too hyped there. I'm sorry, but like,
I love that. I mean, and I love what you're saying about I think my spiritual teacher called it like the great path of, or the great something of becoming, like this constant becoming, right? It's like you get trapped in the becoming of it instead of just the being, which is why I love that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, which he also repeats all the time. And I repeat to myself of just like, yeah, you literally just can be there at any moment. Like, like you don't, there's no becoming in that doesn't exist there, because there's not that sense of time, first of all, and there's not that like sense of identity. And I mean, time is a big that's a whole other topic, but I feel like that plays into this. That's a huge element of this, right?
yeah,
Like our sense of
literally hit
time.
on that a practice that I kind of started implementing in my life years ago, which was before I reach for a tool, I'm still. Like when I want to grab something to be like, oh, this will make it better, or I'm like, oh, like let me look at this book and there's this really interesting thing that this person said that will like fix me or whatever. I practice being still for like a minute to 2 minutes, just right. And before I go and grasp that, to kind of consistently sort of hit home on the awareness of that, like, you know, we're not doing anything here, right? We're not, there's nowhere to go. There's nothing to become, right? This thing is used, this tool that we're about to reach for is the thing that's going to point us to what's happening right now, the stillness that is just there, and then reach. That was really transformative for me. I think that was really useful.
Yeah, I think I need to start implementing that. I feel like my mind has been having its way with me, to be honest, like the last bunch of months. I feel like it's just like this constant attempt at, it's just grasping at stuff. Like it just wants to think about stuff. Like that's what a mind does. Like it just wants to think about stuff, and it'll just do anything to like have something to think about.
Literally.
And there's infinite, we can do that all the time, obviously, like we all do that all the time, think about stuff. But yeah, it's like comes back down to that identity, like how much are we identifying with our thoughts, how much are we believing them, how much are we, you know, are we believing them so and taking them so seriously that we take action on them. That's like sort of, I think, the most you can believe in a thought is like letting it inform your actions. We can believe it so much that we ruminate on it for a long time. That's also like a form of really taking that seriously. We can think about it so much that we like write about it. I mean, and that's why I think art is so awesome, because it's kind of like another way of kind of like allowing it space, but not necessarily taking it seriously. Like, you know, having these stories in our minds and creating pieces of writing out of them or pieces of art out of them, which allows them the space, but kind of like lets it, like releases it in a certain way.
Yeah.
Too.
That's so, like, you know, and the way that story is structured, I think is the most hilariously insidious thing to me, because uh I've said this before, that we're all kind of Pokemon saying the same thing over and over again. It's like the only story that we can tell is the story of consciousness. We can't actually say anything else. So we have this sort of perennial story that we're just telling ourselves, like, you're enough. Hey, man, you were enough. Hey, it was in you all along. Hey, you're enough. Hey, like, we're literally every story. We can't say another story, like every story forever ad for now. They come off in varying degrees of clarity, but at the end of the day, there's one moral. Like, you either take a W or you take an L. Like, you either knew you were enough or you didn't. Like, that's it. And so I think that's hilarious how you say, like, it creates space, because it's almost like it's well, that was a download. Hold up. I don't know if I can say this on the internet. It's like, for me, it feels very much like, because the stories that we tell are imbued with this sort of perennial truth, the structure of them naturally sort of reinforces that truth. When we create story, it feels like that sort of instance of when for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. It's like, for you so loved the universe, of the world, for you, that you created this story. And because of the space that's created, when you actually experience in that story the awakening that happens over the course of that story, you don't perish, but you have everlasting life. Because on the other side of that is the falling away of ego and the diving into the mystery of everything. And it's a story that you created for yourself. Like, for me, that's like really interesting.
Is this like also the story of like the resurrection? I've been thinking about the resurrection the whole time we've been talking.
That's what comes up for me, honestly. And that's not just me. I've read some books, and Meister Eckhart talks about that, being God, or becoming God, but not in like a becoming God type sense, but in the sense of just that sort of the death of this sort of egoic structure of Christ, and the resurrection into sort of the space of the kingdom of heaven. And like, it's, yeah, that's what comes up for me when we're just letting go of sort of, you're allowing that story to die. And the drama of that is, like, I think, really poignant in how our sort of egoic space grasps at, like, hey man, don't go. I'm going to poke holes in this direct experience, the kingdom of heaven. That sounds like bullshit. You can't, you're not going to be able to make decisions. You're not going to have any friends. You're not going to be able to relate to anything. You don't want to be there. And that feels,
what are you even going to do?
What are you even going to do? How are you going to live? And that feels like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane being like, I don't want this. Like, God, like, take this from me. I don't want this. I thought I wanted to die. I'm good. You can just keep it. And like, even like in the story of Christ, it's so pivotal that he gives up the ghost. It says Christ gives up the ghost, which I think is such a crucial detail, that it was like, I chose to do this. Like, especially since it was like established over the course of the gospel that he's like that dude, like, even the guy we gets on the cross, and a couple of them, and the guys were like, hey, you're the Christ. How about you hook it up, my guy? Like, what are you doing? And I think that feels like the sort of, once again, that ego sort of grasping at its last vestige of survival. Like, come on, man. When you think you're a thought, the idea of that is just devastating. It not being there, me taking no thought, which is another sort of Eastern term for moving from that space, is like devastating to something that only knows itself by thinking. It's like a death. It's a proper death. And so, yeah, the resurrection into the kingdom of heaven requires a tremendous amount of faith, I think.
Letting go of I'm just having flashes to some things that I've been really holding on to and how painful it's been to let them go. Like, and that's like very confused, it's like things where I'm like, why can't I just like let this go? Like, I don't understand the I don't understand the gripping of it, it doesn't feel like it's like, but obviously there's like part of me that feels really identified with these things. And just, I'm just flashing to like the pain that I've been experiencing in the last few months of like letting that go. And so I'm just thinking, God, like this is really, for humanity, like such a thing. like this is not an easy, we're talking about it in an easy way, and like sometimes things are easier than others, and some I feel like that's in a way like where grace comes in sometimes, of peeling those fingers back. Right.
What a beautiful description of grace. Thank you so much for doing that. Yes, absolutely. Right. That's the nature of the guru. That's the nature of fucking just grace from whatever, anything, like having those moments where just for inexplicably you're just like dropped in and you're like, oh, right. Right. There's nothing to do. But you really I feel like the morning of that, like we really do mourn those, that identity. It's a death of sorts. It's just, it feels like it's like, oh God.
Yeah. And that could be your own way that you see yourself. That could be like, for example, oh, I was so smart and now I'm losing my memory, or like whatever the thing is. That could be, I was very beautiful as a youth and now I'm getting older. That could be a relationship. That could be like a job that you were really attached to. Like we attach and identify with like so many things, and different people attach and identify with different things. Could be like a quality of themselves, could be like some external person or some work that they're doing, or the house that they live in, like their family. Like there's so many options. We're provided with a wide variety of options of things to attach to in our lives and be identified with. And then at the end of the day, like we have to let them all go. I mean, we don't have to, I guess. I mean, we are going to die, but
yeah, letting that go is weird. It can be weird. I think also because it was the sort of nature of the construction of our sort of matrix too, right? We're 2 years old and we're conceptualizing things. So we're immediately identifying with myself and something else. But I think that when we don't cultivate that space internally towards an older age, we aren't really taught how, as Sadhguru says, we're not given the user's manual for our sort of internal states of being. And we don't actually question it usually until, something, a lot of the time, and I guess that's sort of what people mean when they're saying reducing the stigma of mental health. A lot of the time that, we don't question things until something goes wrong when you're outside of the paradigm, but the paradigm is fucked. So it's like, it's like if you're going along with like normal, you're going deeper and deeper and down the rabbit hole of silliness. And it's like, questioning that space, questioning, whoa, I know when I was 2 years old, I learned this was me and that was a tree, but hear me out. What if we're the same fucking thing? What if I don't exist without that tree and that tree doesn't exist without me, and this environment is all interconnected? Like that completely shifts the way that we experience life.
Yeah. I remember reading Alan Watts, and I remember like actually this like one very specific thing where my friend just goes, the inside is the same as the outside. And I was like, what? Like, what does that mean? I was like really thinking about it. Like, what does that mean? I have no idea. And then I remember like reading some Alan Watts thing, and it like painted a picture for me, and I was like, oh, like it clicked in like exactly what that meant, which is exactly what you're saying, of like, and I actually think I just listened to a video that you did about this too, and I was like brought back to that moment of like, right, we cannot exist without the sun. So is the sun part of my body? Like, yeah, I mean, yes. You like, where do we find those boundaries between ourselves, quote unquote, and others are like completely arbitrary. Like, and I think it's easy to see that in a way with like a fetus situation where it's like, when does that baby become like its own, like, first of all, is like the egg separate from the mom? Like, how do we even break down, first of all, our own bodies? Like, who are we? Like, is that egg me? Is it just like part of me that's like, is it just inside of me, but it's something else? And like when does that, if the baby's like inside the mom, like, is that one being, is that two being? Like, when we really start to think about these things, it's like, yeah, like boundaries are completely arbitrary. We can't really separate ourselves. And you were kind of in this video talking about like, yeah, the environment, like the sun or whatever. It's like how we don't exist in a void. So what does that mean for our identity?
Really not true then, though, right? Though, but like, it's really not true. Like the multiplicity, the differentiation through multiplicity is brilliant, because it's like it's the same thing, but at the same time, that tree's gonna hurt you when it falls on you. Like that shit is very fucking real. Is it really a tree? Is that really what it is? Is it really? No, it's not. It's not. I mean, rather, is it truthfully that? No, that doesn't make any fucking sense. Obviously, there's no humans that don't exist without this environment. It just doesn't happen, at least not the way that we're made up, right? And so that's very true, but it's also the relativistic nature of how real things are, that we have created these separations, are also very real. And sort
it's
of
both.
balancing, yeah, it's both. Balancing
Can we
that
hold
paradox.
that? Yeah,
Exactly. That can only be held sort of in experience,
yeah,
like experientially. And when you pull it out in pieces, people have those like weird spiritual fights, those philosophy fights where they oscillate from one side to the other. Like, oh, you can't be like all conceptual. No, I am one. That's the sort of that very early new agey space of like, I am the oneness, I am wholeness, that's it. And it's like with a disregard or vice versa, like, oh, it's all about the groundwork and that's that space. But like, that's what happens when the ego gets a hold of something that it can't conceptualize. It pulls it down into polarity, and it's like material and spiritual, but we're really, what the inside is the outside and the outside is the inside at the same time. Like it's
like if you draw like the image at the time that I had was, okay, if you draw a square with like pencil on a wall, it creates an outside and an inside, but it's still just the wall.
Yeah.
You didn't actually create two separate spaces. You created like the perception of two separate spaces, and you added some graphite to the environment, whatever. But it's like, yeah, like how do we hold both of that? And like and our perception matters, but like, can we like switch it back and forth? And so it's so interesting. Like, I love this conversation because it's just like bringing me back to that time when I was like kind of first awakening and like realizing this, and that was like such a fun time. And I feel like, can't remember what I was gonna say, never mind. I feel like there's been so many things that I also, I wanted to like quickly, we probably can't talk too much longer, but you were talking about like, there's something you said about labels. You didn't say label, that word. But there was something about like, with mental health, I think this is a huge thing, like that getting that diagnosis can be really helpful when you're feeling, why am I like this or whatever, but then letting go of that, and like how labels can serve kind of both of those purposes of solidifying when you need that, and then that can become an entrapment too, like which is sort of that a boundary. And I guess that can be described as anything, of like the boundary of like who I am and myself can be really helpful at times. We can't just be like floating in the universe of the water of the universe, whatever. Which is
what the ego imagines, by the way, which is what it imagines that's like. It's like, oh, you'll be floating.
Totally.
Because that's the only way it can conceptualize that.
Right. That's a good point. So it's like, it's like these labels can and these identifications can serve to bring us into something and to kind of solidify something, and then they can also become this entrapment. So just being like really aware, and maybe that's a similar thing to like the what's inside, it's the same as what's outside, like this constant, I mean it, right now I'm like doing this motion with my hands, and I'm like, that's just the same thing as like breath. It's just the same thing as everything.
Breath, it's everything. Yeah.
Like
it's so what you said about the I think really one of the biggest challenges is, specifically when we talk about stuff like mental health, is It's extra solidified because of the fact a lot of it is tied to, if I said, hey man, what is that pointing to? Like, what is that idea pointing to? The understanding around a lot of it from a sort of scientific materialistic paradigm is by and large connected to your body. And that feels tactile and that feels like real to people in their heads. And so that can be, that solidifies it even further, like, oh, well, the meaning that I've given to this thing that's in my body that gives me this diagnosis or whatever is, that's something that's what it is. And this is exactly what I see. I have the whole thing. And because part of the biggest challenge, I think, when we talk about sort of traditional spaces of that kind of mental health, outside of the realm of sort of maybe a more esoteric or mystical or spiritual tradition, is not necessarily having a felt sense or deeper understanding of what we're really pointing to, which is a space of no self, right? Having someone in that space, a true guru, a true master who can hold that paradox in real time and see the sort of, be able to kind of thread the needle of, hey, yes, diagnosis, real, thing in your body, real, how you feel about it, how you interact with that, how much you allow that story to dictate who you are is entirely up to you. And being able to do that in real time, I think is a challenge, because the thing that we're kind of pointing to is not something that a lot of people touch literally ever. Like right now, more and more are, but like even to have a sort of momentary moment of transcendence of the self is kind of a big deal. And to be able to have the wisdom and the awareness to know that on this sort of mental health journey that we're taking, all roads kind of lead to enlightenment. They don't really do any, this is where we're going. Having the ability to bring that to the beginning and go, hey, I just want you to listen to me right now, right? You just listen to the words that are coming out of my mouth, and maybe, or drop them into a meditation, or grace, having a grace of a guru to be like, hey, pattern interrupt immediately. It's the moment, I don't know if you've seen Doctor Strange, but in this Marvel movie, he comes in and he's talking to the Ancient One, and she just drops him in. She just hits his third eye and blows his back out. And he's like, everything I thought I knew was bullshit. Like giving somebody that sort of experience and then being like, all right, though, but we are going to work on these stories. There's some issues here. There's some traumas. There's some things we need to work out and talk about. But like starting you there so you know, like, boom, oh shit, bet, right?
Yeah. And I think I feel really lucky. Yeah, I think that I feel really lucky, because I think that's sort of how it happened for me, where I like had this sort of like awakening out of my own identity. But then it's like I had that and I still had all my thoughts and stories. So it was like an interesting, like, and like my recent work has been about, like identifying my thoughts, being able to recognize, oh, I'm having a thought. Oh, that's just a habit. Oh, look, oh, there that is again. And like kind of recognizing like the familiarity of it and the habitualness of it, and being able to kind of like let that go. And for a long time, that was really confusing, because I was like, but I have this enlightenment, like I already know this, like I already know all these things, and to a feeling, like I really can embody it, but that doesn't stop me from getting lost into my story as well. So it's like you kind of have to just do both. I don't know what it would be like to be doing that work without having that enlightenment sort of experience. Like, I know a lot of people don't have that, and they're just doing the meditation and they're just doing all of the work without having that maybe like transcendence, and that is dedication. Like I can't imagine like why people,
right?
I don't know.
And I think a lot of time, unfortunately, that makes it a lot harder too. That can make it harder for folks to even like be able to like take a leap of faith of that. But I also do think I see very much this sort of spectrum of awakening, in a real way. Like everything isn't necessarily going to be these kind of knockdown, drag out type situations. And but I think a lot of the time, like I'll see folks as like depolarization sort of begin to happen, and they're like just breaking down, like it's usually a phase of like, let me tell you why this is bullshit type thing. And you just at some point you're like, wait, I can make everything bullshit. And then that's a kind of awakening of sorts. You're like, oh wait, it's all on me. And then that kind of loosens and loosens and loosens until you know, sometimes there's a kind of dropping it away. But I do think that, yeah, that's hard. That can be really challenging for people when it's all you kind of know. And man, yeah,
Like, how do you tell someone you're not you're not you? you're not your identity, you're not your story. Like that would make no sense. You know, me pre that experience, would make no sense at all. Like I would just be like, okay, like
you're making a great case for gurus, man. Like seriously, that's what they do though. That's what they do. I had like one of my acting coaches, she was like a guru for me in that regard. And she was like sweet with me, but like I definitely have other gurus in my life that are like, they can you're telling yourself the story. I remember actually my acting coach, back to her, one time I said something, I was telling her why I felt like I was having she had like just praised the scene that I had done. She was like, oh, that was a really good scene. And I was like, yeah, man, I had a rough time with it because of blah, 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 blah story. And she just looked me dead in my face and was like, oh, I can see how that's true for you. And I was like, and that stuck with me, right? Totally. She just dropped it in my soul and kept it moving. And I was like, what? And now I can say, oh, there was a story there that I had like bought into, and it was true for me. And she recognized that. And she didn't have to say like, I agree or I disagree, but it was like, I can see how that's true for you. And that space, I think, is something that can be really challenging, especially when you are also sort of in the process of sort of dissecting the story, trying to ascertain meaning from the story. To have the ability to kind of do both, I think, is the true skill of a master, an actual spiritual master, which, yeah, that's a great reason to have them.
Yeah, that's cool. I have not really had like gurus really. I mean, I feel like I turned to Alan Watts. I call him kind of like my first spiritual teacher, and I was able to learn from having my own spiritual experience through, you know, psychedelics, and then having Alan Watts to kind of break apart some of these concepts for me. And then I also had like friends around. Like I feel like I was like luckily in a situation that fostered that. But yeah, and I feel like I haven't really had like and then like obviously, you know, people like you, like I feel like I've always been able to find in a way like peers who have been that way. Like I've never really had like a guru.
Yeah,
although I've had some spiritual teacher. What?
So you got that Oprah swag.
For
sure. Like it's just Oprah at some point you interviewed Deepak Chopra enough times, it's gotta revolve in some kind of way. Shit. Like, you know what I mean? Like you just like it just feels like you recognize it, and you're able to, people do kind of gravitate around your inquiring mind. I think it's
the curiosity. I think that's a key. Like if you can find curiosity and intention, if you can have intention, even if you're like, this is like my probably main practice is I have intention about something where I'm like, I want to know about this thing that I don't understand. Like I could be like, I want to understand love and relationships that I'm not really understanding. I have no idea how to do that. Right. But then you just say, that's my intention, and you just hold it. And then you just get really curious about it. And you're like, I don't know the answer to this right now. But I'm going to let something in. So if it's like something where you're like, I haven't really had a spiritual experience, I don't really know what it means to transcend the self, but I'm curious about what that means. And you don't have to go looking for it. It's not going to be in your mind. Right. One of my like mentors kind of says, I guess I have mentors, gurus. So maybe I do, but she says like, if your mind is thinking it, it's not new. Like anything your mind is thinking is stuff that's already been in there. Like you can just pretty much count on the fact that that's not wisdom coming from up high, like essentially. So it's like having that curiosity and just being like, okay, I'm not going to find it with my mind, but I'm just curious. What does that mean to transcend the self? Just being really, I mean, I think I kind of started that way too. Like my first question was like, what is my soul? Like, I want to find my soul. Like, what does that mean? I was just like, and like I had a series of experiences that kind of led me to having like, I guess, an understanding of like what that is. I mean, do I know my soul? I don't know, but I have that. I had,
Yeah,
a
that's
series of spiritual beliefs.
that's a great place to stop, because I think that was you perfectly encapsulated that space of non-knowing. Thank you so much. That was
This was a great combo. I loved it every second.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Thank you for rocking with me on YouTube and TikTok over here. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Hell yeah. I think we went all in many directions, but I
We
don't
went
know.
in all of them. I feel like we touched every important thing.
Free corner.
Yeah.
Stop. I miss you. I haven't seen you. Okay. I'm okay.
Okay, let's stop the live, but do you want to stay on?
Yeah. Okay. Bye, guys. Thank y'all so much for rocking with me. Talk soon. Over here and ending here, and also